Welcome, and thank you for joining us for the Advancing IT Modernization with FinOps for Government webinar. I'm Caroline Boyd. I'm a principal here at Meritalk, and I will be leading today's discussion. So before we dive into our program, I want to give a big thanks to our sponsor, Datadog, for supporting this webinar and providing their expertise to the discussion. Today, as I mentioned, we're going to be here to discuss the critical role of financial operations, or FinOps, in optimizing IT modernization for federal organizations. As agencies across the government are striving to enhance cloud investments and reduce waste, FinOps provides a collaborative framework that integrates financial management with cloud operations. So we're going to dive into how agencies are successfully implementing FinOps best practices to optimize resources, lower expenses, and importantly, strategically plan for future growth. So I'm excited to welcome our two panelists today who are going to provide their expertise to the discussion. First, we have Kiran Balsa, the Deputy Director of the IT Modernization Division within the Office of Government-Wide Policy at GSA, and Brian Mickelson, who is the Vice President and General Manager of U.S. Public Sector for Datadog. So welcome to you both. Thanks for being here. And to start, I would like to ask each of you to just share a little bit about yourself and your background and what you're doing currently. So Kiran, let's start with you.
Great. Thanks for actually having us here today, Caroline, on the webinar. Really excited to be on Meritalk's webinar. And quick background, so I work at GSA's Office of Government-Wide Policy. I'm the Deputy Director for our group there, and we primarily focus on government-wide IT modernization activities. Historically, a little bit of background, our group was kind of formed in the implementation of the Data Center Consolidation Initiative and Data Center Optimization Initiative. So that's really our origin. And over time, we've kind of expanded to have a more general IT modernization umbrella. We focused historically on cloud adoption, helped develop the Cloud Smart strategy with OMB. And recently, we've established quite a few different work streams. We have free training for the federal government. We actually have a training arm that provides no-cost training to anyone with a .gov address. And on infrastructure type related services, we do a lot of interagency working groups that kind of get all the various subject matter experts throughout the federal government to tackle current pressing problems, and we provide best practice guides and so forth. So we essentially see ourselves as knowledge brokers. And we've done a lot of work in cloud operations recently, and we touched on FinOps. So I'm certainly glad that you guys invited us here to kind of pass on what we've learned from speaking with various agencies. So thank you.
You're welcome. And I know that a DCOI, as we used to call it, right, the Data Center Optimization Initiative, glad to see how it has evolved into the office that you're part of today. Brian, I'll turn it over to you to give a brief introduction as well.
Sure. I'm Brian Mickelson. I lead Datadog's U.S. Public Sector practice. If you think about what Datadog is, we are a full stack hybrid architecture, observability, and security solution. But that really plays instrumentally into this conversation today about FinOps and IT modernization practices around FinOps. Because eventually what it comes down to is how do we actually empower our teams, and that's plural, to work together? So whether we're talking about finance, developers, operational teams, how do we allow them to work together to make optimization decisions to continue to provide great IT experiences and great IT cost and modernization capabilities while managing that which is inherently very complex and getting more complex by the day? So thank you for having me.
You're welcome, and thank you, Brian. So Kiran, I'm going to toss it back to you for the first question, and maybe we just do a little stage setting and talk about what is exactly FinOps. How did it originate? How does it differ from some of the traditional financial management and cloud financial management systems? So would love your take to get us started.
Sure. Absolutely. Happy to kind of level set here. So FinOps, like you defined earlier, it's financial operations. It's essentially collaboration between various stakeholders within an organization. Like Brian had mentioned, collaboration between finance and DevOps and, development teams and others. So it's really a partnership, a tight partnership with your finance teams, your technology teams, and your business teams. Really, the genesis of FinOps kind of goes back to the private sector. Netflix and Uber were heavy early adopters of infrastructure services, cloud services, and they needed a means to figure out what they were spending in a real-time manner, because obviously with cloud, you scale a lot, you have unpredictable usage consumption, especially if Netflix drops a new, top hit on a Friday night, they may scale to millions of users on a Friday night. So you need to be able to support that. So they need a predictable means of understanding how they're spending on their cloud services. So that's really the origin. And over time, it got formalized into what we now know as FinOps by the FinOps Foundation in 2019. So the core principle behind FinOps is to help folks understand where they're spending money, what they're spending money on, and how to optimize it. Like traditional cloud financial management, it's really focused on cloud cost management and governance and optimization strategies, but it doesn't necessarily focus on that tight partnership between your finance teams, your technology teams, and your business teams. And it's really about those relationships and having that strong tie-in.
Yeah, no, that's great. Brian, maybe let's talk a little bit sort of about that actionable cloud cost strategy. I mean, we know that moving to the cloud comes with clear benefits. And, across many agencies, they say, effective cloud governance and management processes are critical to controlling costs. But what are some of the challenges that we're seeing with cloud spending broadly, across the customers you're working with?
I think some of the biggest problems are how do we consider resource optimization without trade-offs around quality or performance? And so I think at the technical level, that's sort of where the challenge resides. And then, because this really is a people, process, and tools type issue, just like DevOps or DevSecOps, what we're really trying to do is collapse organizational silos so that teams can better work together. The reality is, how do I give that information in real time to create a collaboration between my finance teams and my development, my security, and my operations teams? So it's finding that balance behind how am I going to do resource optimization? How am I going to manage costs? But how do I do that in such a way as to not hurt, quality or performance of the capability I'm trying to provide?
Yeah, and Kieran, I don't know if you want to address some of the challenges as well. I mean, you're looking at it from, a different viewpoint, of course.
Yeah, of course. No, I think Brian kind of highlighted some of the key challenges associated with it. I want to kind of give you some background on a recent effort that we had at GSA. So we run a large community practice. We have about 3,000 federal staff that are members of this practice. And in fact, I'll post the link in here in a little bit. So everyone watching this webinar, please click it. You can go there and join our community practice and access tons of resources that we've developed that can support you guys. But last year, we polled our community to see what's really pressing, what's top of mind for their agencies, and they were focused on operations, cloud operations to be specific. So we ended up creating an interagency working group. We had about 80 participants from about 30 different agencies, and we had some really good discussions on what's important to them and some of their pain points. We talked about governance, we talked about business, we talked about technology operations, and there was a lot of conversation around getting your hands around an agency's cloud infrastructure and what they have. From a technical standpoint, they're talking about resource sprawling and things like that. But from a cost and business standpoint, they really wanted to understand what's being used within their enterprise. So they wanted visibility. They wanted, especially for multi-cloud environments where they have distributed use, you have users across different business units that may have ability to spin up resources on their own. The enterprise needs a means to be able to track that and understand when they're spinning up resources, how they're spinning it up, and how much they're paying for it. Agencies, the folks that we spoke with, they kept telling us that their mission can be unpredictable and they can have usage spikes. So that's another item that they had issue with, is understanding when the usage is going to be variable, and over provisioning of resources. That's another common issue that we saw. And also decentralized cloud purchases, having governance models and guardrails around that. So having inefficient use of resources, duplicate services. There's a lot out there. I think over the last 10 years, agencies have been spending a lot of time getting to the cloud. Well, we're there now. pretty much every agency has some form of cloud adoption. You're either an infrastructure service, you either have multiple infrastructure services, or you have a strategic partner, or you're leveraging SaaS services. Regardless, the point is everyone's using these services, and now it's time to optimize. And FinOps is a great tool to do so.
Well, thank you for sharing that link, and we'll make sure our viewers can see it here. But you mentioned that we're there now, right? We're there now. So what are some of the other factors that government officials at any level, and maybe Brian, you can address, beyond federal too, but need to be considering in whether they're implementing FinOps?
Yeah, I think it's great. And actually, I'm gonna plug a GSA paper too. And it might be the same one Kieran's talking about. But GSA put out I'm looking at it now. Put out a FinOps operational best practices. It's amazing because one of the things it does is it creates a framework for what are the metrics you actually want to track. Because I think that's one of the real challenges, right? Kieran talked about we're at the cloud. The way I articulate this is there's a lot of talk about hybrid cloud, which is this idea that we've got legacy data centers and we've got some form of modern cloud computing. What I would just simply suggest is that hybrid cloud itself, that's just another way of saying modern IT architecture. Everybody has some perspective of modern cloud, which is a consumption-based economic, way of paying for cloud resources all the way back to their legacy. But the challenge, I think, for FinOps is where do we start? So I've got some cloud resources. What am I really supposed to do? And I think the key here, and the GSA paper on this does a really good job. It articulates about 20 different key metrics that you might want to track. And I'll give you a couple examples. Compute right sizing, snapshot management, storage right sizing, tagging policies. And then I think there's a huge one around logging management, right? If you think about even where like M2131 comes in, log costs are exorbitant and growing at an exponential rate. Every agency out there needs to have a cloud cost management strategy related back to how they're doing log management in line with cyber initiatives and M2131. So I think the real key here is probably to summarize this. They need to look at what are the operational frameworks, what are the specific metrics we're trying to detect and pull out, and then I think it always comes back to, from a tooling perspective, what is the technology and capabilities that will allow me to do this in an effective way across my organization.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. That's great. Kieran, Brian mentioned a couple of the metrics from the some of the work your team is already doing. But if you've got some other factors you think that government officials, at agencies at any level need to be considering as they get ready to implement FinOps.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm so glad that Brian brought up that paper. I have to give credit where it's due. It's our colleagues at the TBM PMO. So they did some outstanding work last couple of years with running some FinOps case studies and putting out this best practices document. So as far as what anyone at government should consider when implementing FinOps, it's really, it's really about organizational change. It's understanding what FinOps is and how to incorporate it into your organization. And to do that, you need to understand yourself. First, you have to understand what is your cloud spend, how are you acquiring it, and you need to understand your business. Do you have variability in your business, or is it pretty predictable? Do you have a large distributed organization, or do you just have a single strategic partner? Are you a large CFO agency, or are you a small agency with 15 people who just needs a shared resource? So that's really what you have to look at first. And once you realize, that you have a need to optimize, then you have to look at what it takes to actually implement FinOps. There's a cost associated with it. Nothing we do is actually ever free, right? There's people, there's time, there's policy changes, there's communicating initiatives. All that has to be taken into account. So if you have a need for various stakeholders within your organization, such as the business, your finance, and your technology folks, to talk together on a routine basis, have daily stand-ups, or have real-time conversations to understanding why there's a spike in usage, absolutely, it's probably worth it to implement FinOps and then get that in place. But if you have a lot of steady state spend where there's not much variability and it's really predictable and you know what you're buying, then you may not need to implement all aspects of FinOps, but you can certainly do things that are listed in that white paper and best practices doc that Brian had mentioned. Take a look at reserved instances, look at, unattached storage devices, Make sure that you're optimizing, make sure you're not over provisioning. So those are all very foundational, important things that are part of what FinOps kind of recommends you do, but you may not need to go full bore into organizational change and implement brand new processes to incorporate into your governance model. So really, first step, understand yourself, then figure out if it's worth investing the time and effort to implement a full FinOps model.
I think it's great that you mentioned there's a cost to all of the things, right, that you're talking about, because I think a lot of people assume that FinOps is strictly about saving money on cloud costs. But obviously we know that's not the case. And in fact, what I'm hearing is that FinOps is more broadly aimed at helping teams achieve scale, right? Scale. So Brian, how are government organizations achieving this scale piece?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And it's really a problem that we see almost every day here at Datadog. If you think about how it really plays out, there was a book a few years ago called Measure What Matters. And I think what happens in the world of technology is you can't measure what you can't observe. And so frankly, when you think about how I introduced Datadog as a full stack hybrid architecture, observability, and security solution, when we talk about that observability, what we're really talking about is the things that are becoming more complex. We used to live in a world of data centers where you could walk into a data center, plug in a serial jack, and understand what was going on from a compute, memory, storage perspective on that device. Everything now has become significantly more complex as it becomes significantly more ephemeral. We no longer walk into our data centers. Our systems in the cloud are typically no longer static. They're dynamic resources that scale up and scale down based on demand. And so inherently, organizations, whether they're talking about FinOps, whether they're talking about cloud, modernization, migrations, whatever it may be, organizations have to improve the way that they observe the underlying characteristics of their IT architecture. So from Datadog's perspective, we think a lot about observability. Traditionally, in the world of observability, people were talking about infrastructure, infrastructure metrics, application traces, and log strategy. Now it just continues to accelerate. It gets into the world of backend databases. It gets into the world of real user monitoring and synthetics to make sure user experiences are happening at the right time and place. But all of this, to what Kieran talked about, there are associated costs, trade-offs. There's going to be times when it's just things like managing reserved instances or having a better snapshot policy to remove costs associated with snapshots that really aren't needed because you've already updated those. But I think the bigger picture is figuring out, how do I in real time have observability of the important things happening across my very ephemeral IT stack? And that's where technologies such as Datadog, a Gartner Magic Quadrant leader for observability, comes into play. And then I'll talk later on about it, but that's also how we attach those metrics, traces, and log observability characteristics. We have the ability to then attach that to their associated cost characteristics, which is where we bring this idea of FinOps and IT modernization together under the umbrella of full stack observability.
Well, I think observability is going to be critical to agency leaders and those implementing FinOps into their teams. And so, Kieran, I would ask you, this integration of FinOps into the existing organization. You mentioned change management in the previous question and how critical that is. How can we encourage fostering buy-in across the agency? What do leaders need in order to, to come together? Like you both said in the very beginning, this is about empowering teams, about partnership across the agency. So let's talk a little bit about that and what needs to happen to encourage those leaders to utilize things like observability as well as all the other tools to do this implementation.
I really like the idea of change management, organizational change management, because whenever you do something large scale, whenever you have a change that requires multiple business units or stakeholders to get involved, I think it's always best to start at the top and talk to the senior leaders. In the context of FinOps, I think it's really important to articulate the business case on why the agency or organization should invest the time and effort into implementing something that will change the way they work. So you have to talk about the business value, what you're going to gain from the investments with FinOps. You have to talk to your CFOs. You have to talk to your lines of business. because sometimes they're used to having a lot of autonomy and not being questioned for whatever they're spending their money on, or they're spending your money on, because they're running the mission, they're supporting the mission. But the reality is, if the agency can optimize their spend in the cloud, they can reallocate those funds for more mission-driven initiatives. So you have to kind of put that out there and kind of make the sell. Once you do that, you can start small. There is no need to actually go full bore and make change happen right away. Do a pilot, do a proof of concept, do a couple small services, see how that goes, get some early wins, get some buy-in, and celebrate those and build on that. Once you do that, make sure you provide the training for the folks that are involved in this. Unless they're trained, they know what they're doing, then really it's really setting up a system for failure. Once you have incremental changes and improvements, then you can actually adopt it wholesale and build it into your everyday governance model, and then achieve change for the entire organization.
Right, small successes. Brian, go ahead.
Yeah, if I can attach to that too, because change management as a topic is it's huge, right? And I think it's often overlooked. A lot of times people want to buy technology and they think that, we bought the technology, why isn't it working? There's an organization out there called Professional Science Incorporated. They teach a specific means of change management. Their acronym for it's ADKAR. What I would offer is the reason most things fail is lack of proper reinforcement over time. So Datadog really agrees with what Kieran had to say. We think it's a phased approach. Start small, start with something specific you want to accomplish. This ADKAR model sets the stage for that. ADKAR stands for awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. And I think what happens is awareness, desire, and knowledge they come at the front end of a lot of projects. And even without knowing change management, a lot of times those things will carry themselves forward with enthusiasm and energy. But it's the actual ability and reinforcement over time why things fail. So the way Datadog looks at this, it's a combination of people, process, and tools. It's about taking an effective, protocol for change, but think about the specific outcomes you're trying to address. We're trying to reduce our compute costs. We're trying to reduce our log cost. We're trying to improve the quality of our applications while reducing our development costs. What are the specific objectives you're trying to achieve? Start small, build a project around that. And I think over time, what you're really doing is you're bringing in a cultural change around FinOps, which is back to where I started, connecting the dots between the financial accounting piece with the developers, the operators, and the security teams that actually have the hands-on and real-time touch points with the technology.
So Brian, just going to stick with you for a minute. Who is doing this well, or who has started down the path well? What agencies are you seeing, being successful in implementing this? They may not be there yet, right?
Yes.
But talking about these steps that both of you have mentioned, is there anybody that's all the way there, or I'd love to just hear some of the successes.
I'm probably going to defer a little bit to Kieran here, but I without divulging specific customers and the Datadog alignment, what I'd say is VA, OPM, GSA, obviously here, elements of the Army. I think these are the places where we're seeing this conversation in earnest. But my general point of view is that everybody has to become better at this. There is no way to have an IT modernization practice, I'd say an effective IT modernization practice, if the senior leadership cannot articulate the state and forward-looking guidance for their FinOps practices. Because the challenge, the benefit/challenge of cloud computing is it's consumption-based. And so it's important in this modern IT construct that organizations understand how they are making acquisition decisions and how they're balancing those decisions back to getting the best capabilities they can at the most optimized cost modeling.
Yeah, so Kieran, maybe the question is, agencies that are having success at this, where are they? What are some of the things they're doing that are, moving the needle in the right direction?
Yeah, absolutely. I can kind of add on to what Brian has said. So like I mentioned before, our colleagues at the TBM PMO within our division, they've done some fantastic work in this area. They routinely consult with agencies and help them save 10 to 20% of what they're spending already. Specifically, they've worked with Opium in the past, and they helped them save $500,000 annually by moving storage tiers to saving plan commitments. So that's a very concrete, specific example. They've worked with a division in the Army and helped them with a $15 million cost avoidance with the annual $1 million savings. So that's significant. But that division was also spending upwards of $300 million a year. So there is definitely room for optimizing any agency spend, like Brian alluded to. All of these examples I mentioned, they're actually written up in some very detailed case studies. I'm going to post the link here. The FinOps PMO, they've actually posted all of these case studies on the IT vendor management office site at GSA. So I highly recommend everyone who's interested in adopting FinOps, or if you are already adopting FinOps, maybe you can take a look at these case studies and then get a different vantage point about how to approach your cost savings.
Yeah, that's great. I was actually going to ask you a little bit about these best practices, and I'm not sure if that's the same guide. I know you in your role, as you said in the beginning, are really focused on IT modernization a little more broadly, but FinOps is obviously a significant piece of that. So how is FinOps, like, what's the synergy with the smart IT modernization strategy and some of the other work that your team is doing?
Absolutely. So we partner a lot with our colleagues that focus specifically on FinOps. And obviously, like you mentioned, FinOps is a major element of modernizing your IT infrastructure. I like to take a broader look at IT modernization. We always tell folks to take a portfolio management view of what they're doing. That we've actually released a guide called the Application Rationalization guide that came out along with Cloud Smart. So you can Google that, go to Cloud Smart on CIO.gov, and you'll find the guide. But start there. Pretty much every major organization is focused on portfolio management. Part of portfolio management is understanding where your systems are and the costs associated with it. Once you do that, then you know where your spend is. Then you have to understand how it's aligned to your business. Same concept with FinOps, more focused on spend in a cloud environment. You kind of have to understand where your systems are, who's using them, what they're being used for, and how much they cost. Once you have that data, then you can actually optimize it. Historically, a lot of agencies have done like a wholesale move from their data center to a cloud infrastructure environment. They've done a lot of lift and shift. They have a lot of legacy applications. So there's a mix of different applications on there. They may have some container-based cloud native applications now with legacy applications. I think FinOps is a great tool to understand what these applications, how much you're spending for what type of services you're receiving from it. Using that type of information, you can make smart investment decisions, and you can kind of plan out what your IT modernization strategy should be for your enterprise. You can find out what applications are really having cost overruns, they're not efficient, and you may want to decommission them or kind of repurpose them or retrofit them and make them more cloud native. So there's a lot of opportunities once you understand how much you're paying and for what services, and trying to make sure that everything's aligned to a business goal and objective, because we don't do IT just to do IT. We should be supporting the mission. That's the whole point of us being kind of involved in this and having our hands around it and governing it.
Yeah, it's the holistic look, as you said, the larger portfolio management. Brian, I'm going to give you the last word here because you mentioned in an earlier response or the importance of innovation as part of modernization. And so how is FinOps contributing to this culture of innovation? You know, we talked a little bit about change management, but you mentioned the culture too. So the culture of innovation that is permeating across agencies, and society in general, right? But what initiatives is Datadog undertaking to support agencies, seeking to really implement that culture of innovation?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the setup on that. When we look at this, I mean, the general take, when we talk about the FinOps side, then I'm going to take it to a higher level, it's really about automating cost tracking and reporting as a function of your innovative approach to FinOps. But what I would do is I'd like to take a look at the other side of this. The opposite side of innovation is the accumulation of technical debt over time, right? And I think the challenge is technology is moving at such a pace right now, and I don't run into anybody that that puts up resistance to this idea. The IT systems that we build and manage for our for government deliveries they are becoming more complex at an accelerating rate. Like, I've got a great amount of empathy for all of our government IT workers, because it really is a complex burden on their plate today. Where Datadog comes into this is at the observability level. It's a single unified platform. It's a SaaS-based delivery, which makes it very simple for implementation. It's a FedRAMP moderate heading towards FedRAMP high and DoD IL5 authorized capability. But what that single unified platform does, it provides a plethora of services that allow them at the core level to observe my infrastructure, observe my application traces, observe my logs. But specifically in the world of cloud cost management is a unique feature being deployed into Datadog for Government's FedRAMP moderate authorized capability. And there's really three core things it does under that premise of automating cost tracking and reporting. The first thing it's going to allow you to do, Datadog Cloud Cost Management, it allows you to bring in all of your information. A lot of our customers in public sector are AWS, users of AWS, but this works the same for Azure. It works the same for Google Compute. But the first thing we're able to do is we're able to bring in AWS, they call it CURE. CURE stands for Cloud and Usage Reports. So I bring in the CURE, I connect it into an automated tool like Datadog Cloud Cost Management. The next thing that's going to happen is, in an automatic way, the recommendation engine is going to start making recommendations. It's going to see things automatically. And that, I think, is a really key characteristic of all this. Automation has to happen. We can no longer keep up with the pace of technology by doing historical manual processes. So it's about bringing in the cost data. It's about getting the recommendation engine up and running. And then the last thing, and if you do almost any search on cloud cost management, one of the first things you're going to see is, like, we didn't talk about it yet on the call, just simply removing idle costs. Kieran talked about, there's been a ton of lift and shift. It's a whole different topic. I don't want to go down the rat hole of lift and shift, but what I would say is lift and shift is a sketchy practice at times, because what I'm really doing is taking today's problems and making them tomorrow's problems by bringing them into a more modern construct. But one of the very first things we do in the first pass around FinOps and cloud cost optimization, what are my idle costs? Where do I have compute that's not necessary? Where do I have more bandwidth that is necessary? Where can I reduce my memory costs? All of these things add up incrementally to quite a bit of savings. And then this all ties right back into a fairly complex topic around like Lean Six Sigma, right? So what I'm really trying to do is I'm trying to optimize the way that I deliver improving capabilities over time. And then I want to reinvest those savings to continue to create, more well done capabilities for our citizens and our mission participants. So the biggest thing I'll just summarize is observability is a key. Automation for that observability is a key. And then the real thing I'll summarize with what Datadog has been doing in the world of observability and what we continue to do in the world of cloud cost management. We break down the silos that exist today. So whether, typically I'm talking DevOps or DevSecOps and breaking down the silos between the development, operational, and security organizations. In the world of FinOps, what we're doing is breaking down similar silos, but adding organizations in. Now we're bringing the finance organization in, and we're putting them at the table with the operators and the developers. And the single most important thing that I think a FinOps team or a FinOps strategy can do, put the power of decision-making into the operator's hands, into the developer's hands, give them those tools that allow them to see in real time how the changes they make affect the quality and the cost of the deliverables they're building.
Really, it comes down to improving the mission outcomes. So Kieran and Brian, thank you very much for your expertise. There's a lot more we can get into, right? It's a whole nother webinar on lift and shift or technical debt, right? And some of those things. But I want to thank you both for your time today and for sharing that expertise with the audience.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
All right, have a great day, everyone.